I never thought a small routine, something as simple as helping a quiet old lady cross the street each morning, would lead me to the truth that changed the way I see kindness, loneliness, and the invisible stories people carry. But that is exactly what happened. It started on a soft autumn morning, the kind where the air feels light and the sun rises slowly, almost gently, as if it does not want to wake anyone too quickly. I was walking to work, holding a cup of warm tea because coffee had begun to upset my stomach. The streets were still half asleep, the kind of calm that makes you breathe a little deeper. That was when I saw her. She stood at the corner across from the bakery, holding a small canvas bag in both hands. The bag looked older than she was, and she had this way of keeping her shoulders slightly lifted, as though the world around her was a little too cold. Her gray hair was pinned back neatly, and she wore a long brown coat that seemed heavy on her narrow frame. She watched the cars pass, not in fear, but in a quiet way, like she was waiting for the world to give her permission to take a step. I remember slowing down, my feet almost moving on their own. I don't know why. There was something gentle about her silence. When the light changed, she didn't move. She looked at the road. But she didn't move. So I walked up to her and said softly, "Would you like to cross? I can walk with you." She looked up at me, surprised. Not startled, just surprised, like she hadn't expected anyone to speak to her that morning. Her eyes were soft, the color of fading storm clouds. She nodded. Not a word. Just a small, grateful nod. And that became our routine. Every morning at the same corner, at nearly the same time, she would stand there, waiting quietly. And every morning I would help her cross. I didn't know her name. She didn't ask mine. She never said a single word, not even a simple "thank you." But her eyes always carried a calm softness that felt like enough. Over time, I began looking forward to seeing her. I didn't know why exactly. Maybe it was the quiet company, or the simple feeling of doing something kind. Life feels lighter when you do the small things, I think. It gives meaning to moments that would otherwise pass without leaving a trace. Most days we walked in silence. The kind of silence that didn't feel strange or uncomfortable. It was peaceful, like sitting next to someone on a park bench while watching the leaves fall. Sometimes she carried flowers in her canvas bag, white ones. Sometimes she carried nothing. And sometimes she had a letter tucked into her coat pocket, folded carefully. I would try to speak now and then. "Cold morning today." Or, "I like your scarf." But she never responded with words. Only small nods, small smiles, soft looks. In a world filled with noise, her quiet presence felt like a gentle pause. One morning after I walked her across, I saw her hold her coat tighter around herself and continue toward the old houses, the ones with peeling paint and rusted gates. And for some reason, watching her walk alone down that road made me feel something I couldn't quite explain. Strange ache, maybe. A quiet sadness I didn't understand yet. I told myself she was simply reserved. Maybe she lived alone. Maybe she liked silence. Maybe she had lost someone. Old age sometimes carries that kind of weight. I tried not to think too deeply about her life because I didn't want to assume anything. But each day, I noticed a little more tiny details that painted small pieces of her world in my mind. She wore the same coat almost every day. Her shoes were polished but worn. Her hands shook slightly when she held her bag. Her eyes carried something that looked like a story she had lived with for too long. Weeks passed, then months, and our morning routine became as natural to me as brushing my teeth or locking the door before leaving home. Even on days when I woke up late or felt tired, I still rushed to that corner, afraid she might be waiting. I didn't want her to stand there alone. I didn't know it then, but the truth she was hiding, the truth she would eventually speak, was deeper than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't filled with anger or betrayal. It was something quieter, something sadder, something simple, yet heavy enough to change the rhythm of my heart. But before that truth came, there were many soft mornings, many quiet walks, and many moments where I wondered why she chose me, of all people, to wait for. Maybe I reminded her of someone. Maybe she noticed I slowed down when I walked past her. Maybe she sensed that I would not rush her or talk too much or push her to speak. I don't know. I still don't know. But I remember one particular morning clearly. It was raining not heavily, just a gentle drizzle that made everything feel softer. The streets were glistening, and the trees looked darker and richer. I held a small umbrella, and when I saw her waiting at the corner, I walked a little faster so she wouldn't stand in the rain too long. She held her canvas bag close to her chest, shielding it from the drops. Her hair was slightly damp, and a small strand clung to her cheek. "Here," I said, holding the umbrella so it covered both of us. "Let's go." She gave me a small, thankful nod. And for the first time I saw her mouth move, not speaking, just forming the faintest, trembling smile. Something about that smile made my throat tighten. It was so gentle, so soft, so grateful. We crossed slowly, the sound of rain tapping on the umbrella like a quiet rhythm above us. When we reached the other side, she turned to me. Her hand rose, shaking slightly, and she touched my sleeve, not grabbing it, just resting her fingers there for a brief second. Then she let go, turned, and walked away. I stood there longer than usual, watching her small frame move down the wet road, her steps soft, her coat darkened by the rain. That was the first moment I realized something was different about her. Not strange, just different. And somehow, I felt a quiet pull to stay in her story a little longer. Days continued like this, slow and gentle. The world around us stayed busy, but she and I seemed to walk through a different pace, one that didn't care about schedules or noise. Sometimes she arrived a few minutes early, standing at the corner with her hands clasped in front of her. Sometimes she arrived a little late, walking carefully, one step at a time. But she always came. Always. And I did too. People in the neighborhood began noticing. Store owners smiled at us. The man who sold newspapers nodded each morning as we passed. The baker's wife, who always stood near the window arranging pastries, gave us soft waves. To them we must have looked like family. A grandson walking with his grandmother. And maybe that picture made sense. I never had grandparents growing up. My family was small and quiet, made up mostly of silence and distance. Maybe that was why helping her felt comforting. Like I was giving something I had always wished I could give. Or maybe I was filling a space in her life too. One I didn't yet understand. One morning in early winter, the air colder than usual, she didn't show up. I stood at the corner for 15 minutes, then 20, walking small circles to keep warm. My chest felt tight. Where was she? Was she sick? Did she fall? Was she hurt? I tried to calm myself. Maybe she simply overslept. Maybe the cold weather was too much for her. But when more minutes passed, I felt a kind of worry I didn't expect. It was strange caring so deeply for someone I didn't know much about. No name, no address, no story, just presence, just silence. I waited longer, until the moment I knew I had to leave for work. I kept turning back as I walked away, hoping she might suddenly appear. But she didn't. That entire day I couldn't focus. At lunch, I found myself staring at the door of the cafe, half expecting her to walk in. At home, I kept glancing out the window, as if she would suddenly be standing outside, waiting. But the street stayed empty. The next morning I went earlier than usual. Still no sign of her. The third morning I arrived almost 20 minutes before our usual meeting time. And she was there, standing at the corner, holding her old canvas bag, looking thinner than before. Relief washed over me so quickly that I felt my knees weaken for a moment. "You're here," I said, my voice softer than I expected. She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something deep in her eyes. Not sadness, not fear, something else. Something like gratitude mixed with relief, as if she had also worried that I might not return. She held her bag tighter and bowed her head slightly. Not much, just a small, humble gesture that carried more emotion than words ever could. We crossed the street slowly, and I noticed she walked with a little more difficulty that day. Her steps were smaller, and she paused halfway across, resting for a moment. I didn't rush her. I never rushed her. When we reached the other side, she stood still for a moment, catching her breath. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, white and delicate. A folded paper flower. She held it out to me with trembling hands. My chest tightened again. Not from sadness, but from something warm and unexpected. "For me?" I asked softly. She nodded. I took it gently, afraid it might break under my fingers. It was folded with such care, each crease neat and intentional. A small gift, but it felt big to me. "Thank you," I whispered. She touched my arm lightly, then turned to walk down the road as she always did. I stood there holding that paper flower for a long time. It wasn't the last one she would give me, and it wasn't the most important one. The truth she eventually revealed would come much later, and it would arrive in a way I never expected, quietly, gently, and with a weight that settled deep inside me. But at that moment, as I watched her disappear down the street, I knew one thing clearly. Her silence was not emptiness. Her silence was full of something. Something important. Something she wasn't ready to share yet. And I had no idea that when she finally spoke, even just a few words, they would change everything. The winter deepened, and with it, my quiet connection with the old lady grew in ways I didn't fully understand. She still didn't speak. Not a single word. But her silence felt familiar to me, almost comforting. Some mornings, when the cold was sharp and the wind pushed against our coats, I would walk a little slower so she would not struggle to keep pace. Sometimes she walked with her hand resting lightly on my arm. Other days she kept her hands tucked tightly into her sleeves, and her eyes stayed lowered as if she was thinking about something far away. I began noticing small changes in her, subtle details that made my worry grow. Her steps grew slower. Her shoulders looked heavier. Her breaths became quieter, almost too quiet. But each morning she still came. And so did I. One morning as we reached the corner, I saw her holding something new. Small notebook. It was old, with a worn brown cover and a thin red ribbon dangling from the side. She held it protectively, like it carried something she couldn't risk dropping. When I walked up to her, she looked at the notebook, then at me. For a moment I felt she might finally speak. But she didn't. She simply pressed the notebook against my hand, her fingers trembling slightly. Then she gestured toward the street like she always did, our quiet routine. We crossed together. At the other side, she took the notebook back gently, tucking it under her arm. Then she gave me that same soft bow of her head before walking away. I stood there watching her, wondering what was written inside that notebook. Was it her story? Her thoughts? A letter she couldn't bring herself to say out loud? Something inside me wondered if that notebook held the truth I didn't know I was waiting for. Days passed, and winter slowly softened into early spring. The light changed again. The morning air felt warmer, and small green buds began appearing on tree branches. People started walking a little slower, enjoying the change in the season. But the old lady remained the same. Quiet, gentle, mysterious. Sometimes her silence felt peaceful. Other times it felt like a door she was afraid to open. I didn't ask questions. I didn't push. I just walked with her. But slowly, quietly, something else began to change. She started waiting farther from the corner. Few steps down the sidewalk. Then a few more. Almost like she wanted me to walk toward her. Almost like she didn't want to stand alone too long. One morning she stood halfway down the block. Her hands were pressed together tightly, almost nervously. When she saw me, her shoulders relaxed, a small, almost hidden breath of relief. "Good morning," I said softly. She gave me a nod, but it wasn't the calm nod she usually gave. It was quicker, more emotional. As we walked to the street, I noticed she was carrying something tucked between the pages of her notebook. Photograph. At least it looked like one. A small piece of paper sticking out, caught by the wind. I didn't want to stare, but I couldn't help feeling curious. Was it someone she loved? Someone she lost? Someone she was waiting for? She tucked the photo deeper into the notebook when she realized it showed. Her hands trembled. For the first time, I wondered if her silence wasn't simply a personality. Maybe it was something painful. Something too heavy to speak aloud. One morning in early April, something unusual happened. I arrived at our corner, expecting to see her waiting. But she wasn't there. My heart tightened. Every time she was missing, it felt heavier than the last. But when I turned the corner, I saw her sitting on a small bench near the bus stop. It was the first time I had ever seen her sit outside. Her hands were clasped around her notebook, and her coat was pulled tightly around her thin frame. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes softened in relief. She tried to stand, but her legs seemed weak. So I walked to her slowly, kneeling slightly so we were eye level. "Are you all right?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes said otherwise. She tried to rise again, shaking slightly. I offered my arm. She accepted it with a light touch, as if she didn't want to be too much of a burden. We walked together to the crossing place. Her steps were shorter than usual, and she leaned on me more heavily. When we reached the other side, she stopped. She didn't walk away like she normally did. Instead, she took out the photograph from her notebook and stared at it. Her hands trembled around the edges. I wanted to ask who it was, but her silence felt fragile, like a thin layer of ice over deep water. I didn't want to break it. She looked at the picture for a long time, long enough that I felt time slow around us. Then she put it away gently, gave me a small nod, and walked down her usual road. But something in her walk looked different. Heavier. Lonelier. It left a quiet ache in my chest. Weeks passed. Our routine continued. But the small changes kept building. She grew weaker. Quieter even for her. More tired. Some mornings her hands were cold as ice. Other mornings she had trouble holding her bag. One day, her notebook slipped from her grasp and fell to the ground. She bent to pick it up, but she struggled. I reached it first and handed it gently to her. As she took it, the photo slipped out again and landed face up on the sidewalk. Before I could look away, I saw it clearly. It was a picture of a young man, maybe around my age. He had gentle eyes, soft smile. He looked kind. He looked warm. He looked familiar somehow. When she realized the photo was exposed, she snatched it quickly, not in anger, but in panic, as though it was something precious she couldn't risk losing. She pressed it against her chest, her eyes suddenly filling with something deep and painful. I stepped back slightly, not wanting to frighten her. "It's okay," I said softly. Her breathing steadied slowly. She tucked the photograph back into the notebook with trembling fingers. Then something happened. She reached for my hand. Her grip was weak, but it was full of meaning. She squeezed my hand gently, then let go. I wanted to ask about the man in the photo. I wanted to know why she carried it every day. I wanted to know why she walked that lonely road after crossing with me. But she never spoke. Not yet. And I didn't want to force her. Still, the photograph stayed in my mind. Sometimes at night I thought about it. The man's smile. His eyes. The way she held the picture like it was a part of her. Who was he? A son. A nephew. A student. Friend. And why did she walk the same path every day, always alone, always quiet, always carrying that photo? The questions grew inside me slowly. Not heavy enough to hurt, but heavy enough to stay. One chilly morning near the end of spring, something changed again. I reached the corner early, and for the first time, she wasn't standing upright or waiting quietly. She was sitting on the curb. Her coat was bunched around her knees. Her hands were shaking. My heart dropped. I rushed toward her, kneeling beside her. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were glossy, tired. She looked at me for a long moment, longer than she ever had before. Then she opened her mouth. Her lips parted. Breath escaped. Her throat moved. But no sound came. Not even a whisper. She closed her eyes and shook her head, as if frustrated with herself, or maybe defeated. That was when I realized it. She wasn't choosing silence. Silence was choosing her. She couldn't speak. Something inside me softened and broke at the same time. "It's all right," I whispered. "You don't have to speak. I'm here." She looked at me with eyes full of gratitude and sorrow. I helped her stand, my arms steady around her. We crossed the street together, moving slowly, step by step. She leaned more heavily on me than ever before. At the other side, she didn't walk away. She stayed beside me, holding onto my sleeve. Her hand was trembling. Then she placed her notebook in my hands. Not to show me a page. Not to reveal anything yet. She simply wanted me to hold it. As if the weight was too much for her alone. I held it gently, waiting. But she didn't open it. She didn't point to anything. She just breathed quietly for a moment, gathering her strength. Then she took the notebook back, bowed her head, and walked away. But that morning, her steps were slower than ever. She stopped twice to rest against the wall. Her shoulders slumped. Her body looked fragile, like a thin branch bending in the wind. I stood there long after she disappeared, the air feeling heavier than usual. Something was changing. Something important. Something I wasn't ready for. And deep inside, a quiet fear began growing. What if one day she didn't show up again? What if she disappeared without a word, without a chance to say goodbye? What if I never learned who she truly was? The truth was coming. I could feel it. But truths don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they whisper. Sometimes they tremble. Sometimes they hide in the quiet moments before everything changes. And I didn't know it yet. But the moment she finally spoke, even if it was only a few words, would be the moment everything in her silent world finally opened. And the truth would break something in me. But it would also mend something I didn't know was broken. After that morning, the morning she tried to speak but couldn't, something inside me stayed unsettled. Not in a dramatic way. Just a quiet ache, like a soft bruise beneath the skin. I went through the rest of my day feeling as though something fragile was balancing inside me. Every time I remembered the way her lips moved without sound, my chest tightened a little more. Was she losing her voice? Had she always been unable to speak? Was it something recent? Or something she had carried for years? I didn't know. But the not knowing weighed on me more than I expected. Small shift. The next morning I arrived early again, half worrying I wouldn't see her. Each time she didn't appear immediately, a quiet fear rose inside me. I tried to brush it away, telling myself I was being silly. But fear, even the soft kind, doesn't listen to reason. Then I heard her. Not a voice. Not words. But a soft tapping of her cane, something I had never noticed before. Maybe she didn't always use it, or maybe she kept it hidden before. But that morning, she leaned on a thin wooden cane as she walked slowly toward the corner. Her steps were small. Her breath was visible in the cool morning air. Her shoulders trembled with every few steps. I hurried toward her. When she saw me, she smiled, not fully, but enough to tell me she was relieved I came. She touched her hand to her chest as if she were trying to express something she couldn't say aloud. "I'm here," I said gently. Her eyes softened again. This time, when we walked toward the street, she didn't let go of my arm. Her grip was soft but steady. Felt like trust but also like worry. Maybe she was afraid of falling. Maybe she was afraid of losing the routine that had become our quiet bond. As we crossed, she paused again in the middle, catching her breath. I held the umbrella above both of us. Even though it wasn't raining, it simply felt natural now, like protecting someone who couldn't ask for it. When we reached the other side, she didn't walk away immediately. She stayed close, as if gathering her courage for something. Then she reached into her bag and brought out another paper flower. This one was smaller, folded more delicately. The petals were shaped differently, as if she had taken more time with it. She placed it in my hand carefully, her fingers cold against my skin. "Thank you," I said softly. She looked down, her shoulders rising and falling in a quiet breath. I wondered if she wanted to tell me something right then. I wondered if she wished she could. But no words came. Her silence pressed itself between us, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like a door she wanted to open but couldn't. After a moment, she turned and walked down her usual road. Her steps were slower than ever. Her cane tapped softly on the pavement, a new sound in our routine. That sound stayed with me long after she left. "Why me?" That night, I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the two paper flowers she had given me. One white, one softer, slightly smaller. Placed them side by side. For some reason, seeing them like that made my eyes sting. Maybe it was the simplicity of the gesture. Maybe it was the thought that she had made them by hand, carefully folding each crease. Maybe it was the realization that her gifts were her way of speaking when she had no voice left. I opened my window a little, letting the cool air in. The sound of the city at night was muffled and distant, like the world was farther away than usual. And I asked myself the question that had been forming quietly inside me. Why me? Why did she wait for me every morning? Why did she give me those paper flowers? Why did she trust me enough to lean on my arm, to hand me her notebook, to show me glimpses of her world? I didn't have an answer. But a small part of me hoped very quietly that maybe I was helping her more than I realized. Or maybe she was helping me, in ways I hadn't yet understood. The day she nearly fell. A week later, something happened that still lingers in my memory. It was a windy morning. The sky was blank and gray, and the air smelled like rain even though no drops had fallen yet. When I reached the corner, she was already there standing but unsteady. "Good morning," I whispered, adjusting my pace. When she saw me, a deep relief passed over her. Her shoulders loosened, and she let out a small breath that almost looked like she had been holding it for too long. But when she took her first step forward, her foot slipped slightly on the damp pavement. She wobbled. Her cane skidded to the side. Her body tilted dangerously forward. My heart leapt to my throat. I caught her arm before she could fall. For a split second, she froze, her eyes wide, her breath caught. Then her entire face softened into gratitude that felt so deep it almost hurt to look at. "It's okay," I said gently. "I've got you." She held onto my sleeve, her fingers tight, almost desperate. We stood still until she regained her balance. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, her expression tired. Only then did we begin walking again, this time even more slowly, more carefully, more aware of her fragility. That moment changed something in me. Her silence, her trembling, her near fall, all of it made me realize how much she depended on this simple walk, on this simple connection. And I didn't know how to explain it, but I began caring for her in a way that felt deeper than a simple act of kindness. She mattered to me. Her safety mattered. Her quiet world mattered. And I didn't even know her name. A shadow in her eyes. As spring warmed into early summer, her condition seemed to shift again. Not better, not worse, just different. The trembling in her hands grew more noticeable. Her shoulders curved inward more. Her breaths grew shorter when we walked uphill. Her smile when she gave one looked tired around the edges. But there was also something else. Something I hadn't seen before. A shadow in her eyes. Not fear exactly. Not sadness alone. Something like worry mixed with longing. Like someone waiting for something that might never come. She would often look down the road after we crossed, staring into that quiet neighborhood of older houses. Her gaze held something that felt heavy, like a memory she visited every day. I wanted to ask her about it. But each time I opened my mouth, the words felt too big, too intrusive. So I remained silent beside her, just as she remained silent beside me. Two quiet people sharing a small piece of morning together. The day she pointed. One morning we reached the corner as usual. We walked across. And instead of turning to her usual road, she stopped. She looked up at me, her eyes trembling slightly. Then she lifted a shaking hand and pointed down the road she always walked. She didn't walk away. She didn't take a step. She just pointed. As if asking me something. As if offering something. As if needing something. I stepped closer. "Do you want me to walk with you?" I asked quietly. She hesitated only for a moment. Then she nodded. Soft, trembling yes. Something inside me warmed. Not bright like joy, but gentle like being trusted with something fragile. We walked down that quiet street together. The houses grew older. Trees thicker. The air stiller. Halfway down, she stopped in front of a small white house with peeling paint. Its windows were closed. Its yard was empty. Its porch had a single potted plant with dried leaves. She stared at the house for a long time. Her eyes softened with something deep: memory, pain, yearning. Then she touched her hand to her heart. A gesture that said this. Here. This place means something. I stood beside her silently. The moment felt sacred somehow. Like speaking would disturb something delicate. After a while, she turned away from the house, walked slowly back toward the main road, and gently touched my arm in a small thank you. She never pointed again after that day. But I never forgot it. That house was important. Deeply important. I just didn't know why yet. And slowly, so slowly, I didn't realize it at first, the truth began gathering around us, piece by piece. The photo in her notebook, the house she pointed to, her trembling hands, her struggle to speak, her quiet longing. They all carried a story. A story she wasn't ready to tell. A story she couldn't tell. Not yet. Soon. Very soon. Her silence was almost over. And when her voice finally reached me, no matter how soft, no matter how small, it would carry a truth that would change everything I thought I knew about her. And about myself. Summer arrived quietly, the way it sometimes does, slipping into the mornings before anyone truly notices. The air was warmer. The trees held deeper shades of green. The light lingered longer in the evenings. But even with all the brightness around us, something in the old lady felt dimmer. We still met every morning. We still crossed the street together. We still walked in silence. But her steps had grown so slow that even the softest breeze seemed to move faster than she did. One morning, she arrived late, much later than usual. I was beginning to worry she wasn't coming at all when I saw her turning the corner. Her hand gripping her cane more tightly than I'd ever seen. Her breathing was heavy, her movements burdened. She paused halfway toward me, resting against the wall of the bakery. Her eyes closed briefly, as if gathering strength. I hurried to her side. "Let me help," I whispered. She nodded without hesitation. This alone told me how difficult the morning had been. Before, she always tried to walk on her own first. That day, she leaned into my arm the moment I reached her. We crossed slowly. Each step she took felt like it was carved out of effort. Her hand trembled on my sleeve. Her shoulders rose and fell in uneven breaths. When we reached the other side, she didn't move right away. Instead, she looked at me with tired eyes that seemed to carry a question she wasn't sure she could ask. We stood there in silence for almost a full minute, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the soft chirping of morning birds, the quiet rhythm of her breathing. Then she opened her notebook. It was the first time she had ever opened it in front of me. My breath caught. Her hands shook as she flipped through several pages slowly, carefully, as if each page held a memory she wasn't fully ready to face. She stopped on a page near the middle, rested her fingers on the edge for a moment, and gently turned the notebook toward me. There was handwriting on the page. Ni. Trembling. My eyes moved slowly across the words. I used to have a voice. A soft ache filled my chest. She flipped to the next page. I lost it the day my world changed. Her hand tightened around the notebook. Her breath trembled. I didn't speak. I just stood still, waiting for whatever she needed to show me next. She turned another page. This one held a small photograph taped to the center, the same photograph of the young man I had glimpsed before. His gentle smile looked almost alive in the morning light. Below the picture were more words, written slowly as though each letter had taken effort. He was my son. My heart sank gently inside me, not from shock, but from a deep sadness that felt almost familiar. I looked at her. Her eyes were lowered, her shoulders drawn inward, as though sharing these words cost her something precious. She turned the page again. The next sentence was short. He lived in that house. The house she had pointed to. The one she visited with her eyes long before she let me walk there with her. I swallowed slowly, feeling the weight settling in me. She flipped to the next page. Her hands hesitated. Her eyes closed briefly, as if bracing herself. Then, with a slow breath, she opened her eyes again and showed me the words. He died there. A breath escaped me, soft, unsteady. Not from surprise, but from the heaviness of her grief, a grief she had carried quietly, alone, for who knows how many years. She looked up at me then. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, not overflowing, just resting gently, like memories she couldn't set down. I didn't touch her. I didn't speak. I simply stood beside her, breathing in the quiet, letting her know she wasn't alone. She turned another page. The handwriting here was uneven, shakier than before. I go back every day to remember him. Below it, smaller words. I walk because I cannot bear to forget. Her chest rose in a trembling breath. Then she turned one more page. The sentence there was brief, but it hit deeper than all the ones before. You walk with me the way he used to. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her small frame. Her trembling hands. Her tired eyes. The quiet strength she carried through all those mornings. And her silence that wasn't emptiness, but instead filled with memories she had held quietly for so long. She reached out with her weak hand and touched my sleeve gently, the lightest touch, as if she were afraid she might break something between us if she pressed too hard. Then she closed the notebook softly. For a moment we stood together, the world around us fading into a blur of soft sounds and gentle morning air. The light in her eyes shifted, not brighter, not happier, but clearer, as if showing me those words had lifted a weight she had carried too long. She didn't walk away immediately. Instead, she looked down the road, the one leading toward her son's house, and then looked back at me, a question silently forming in her eyes. Do you want me to walk with you again? I asked softly. She nodded. And this time it wasn't a slow, careful nod. It was a relieved one, a grateful one. A nod that belonged to someone who had finally opened a door they had kept closed for too long. We walked slowly down that quiet street together. The trees rustled gently. The birds sang softly. The world felt distant and close at the same time. When we reached the house, she stopped. Her breath trembled. Her shoulders tightened. I waited beside her patiently. She raised her hand to her heart again. Then she touched the gate with her trembling fingers, resting them there lightly as though she feared the gate might crumble if she leaned too hard. A soft sigh escaped her lips, not a sound, but a breath filled with memory. She took the photograph from her notebook and held it in both hands. Her thumbs brushed over the young man's smiling face with a tenderness that nearly broke me. After a long moment, she turned the photo toward me. I leaned closer. And before I could fully process what I was seeing, something inside me stilled. The man in the photo, his smile. There was something familiar about him. So familiar it sent a strange warmth through my chest. I didn't understand it yet. Not fully. But something inside me whispered, there is more. There is something you don't know yet. Something waiting to be found. She saw the confusion on my face. Her expression softened, almost apologetic, as if she knew this truth would shake something inside me. She closed her notebook gently and placed it against her heart. Then, for the first time in months of silent mornings, she formed a word with her lips. Not spoken, not heard, but shaped clearly. I watched closely. Her lips formed the name. Daniel. Her son's name. I whispered it aloud for her. Daniel. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. But she wasn't done. She brought the notebook close again and pointed to the photograph. Then she pointed at me. My breath caught. No, I whispered. He looks nothing like me. But even as I said it, something deep inside me began to shift like a puzzle piece clicking faintly into place. She shook her head gently, a faint smile trembling on her lips, not of joy, but of understanding. Then she wrote one short line beneath the photograph, a line that made my pulse slow, a line that made my body feel suddenly weightless, a line that read, "He knew you." For a moment I did not move. The world around us seemed to pause. Even the small breeze brushing past us felt still. He knew you. The words echoed inside me long after I read them. They sank in slowly, like water rising around my ankles, unsure whether to comfort or drown. I looked at the photograph again. Really looked. The young man had kind eyes. Gentle eyes. The kind of eyes that carried stories without forcing anyone to listen. He had a calm smile, the kind that made you feel safe, even if you didn't know him well. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't place him in my past. How? I whispered. The old lady watched me carefully, her expression soft but steady, as if she knew the question would come. She turned another page in her notebook and wrote slowly, taking her time as though each letter needed space to breathe. When she finished, she held the notebook out to me. He helped you once. My eyes narrowed gently, searching my memories. Helped me. When? Where? I had lived in this neighborhood only a few years. Before that, I had moved around for work, never settling long enough to know many people. My memories were scattered like loose photographs in a box. The old lady saw my confusion and turned to another blank page. She wrote again. Long ago. Before he died. The words were simple, but they carried weight, like stones being placed quietly into my hands. Before I could speak, she kept writing. You were younger. Scared. A soft shiver slid through me. Younger. Scared. My mind drifted uninvited to a time I didn't revisit often. A time when everything in my life felt uncertain, when I barely knew who I was or where I was going. But there had been someone who helped me once. A stranger with a soft voice. A stranger who sat with me on a quiet sidewalk after a mistake I didn't know how to fix. A stranger who said 3 simple words that changed something inside me. You are safe. Could it be him? The memory was blurry, faded by time, softened by distance. The face I recalled wasn't clear. But the feeling was still there. Warm. Stable. Lifeline. I swallowed softly. She watched me with careful eyes, as though she could see the moment a distant memory stirred in me. Was he? I hesitated. Did he stop to help someone one night near the old bus station? Her eyes widened, not fully, but enough. She nodded. Slow breath escaped me. I hadn't told anyone about that night. Not a single person. I had been barely 20. Exhausted. Plus, my life had been heavy with things I couldn't name back then: fear, uncertainty, loneliness. I remembered sitting on the cold ground, my hands shaking for reasons I didn't understand, feeling like the world had fallen out from under me. And then someone sat beside me. Not close enough to overwhelm me. Not far enough to leave me alone. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer solutions. He simply stayed until my breathing steadied. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Felt seen. I looked again at the photograph in her hands. And though my memory didn't give me perfect clarity, something inside me recognized the same gentleness. I nodded slowly. I think I remember him. A soft breath left her, a breath that carried relief, sadness, and something like gratitude all mixed together. She touched her chest gently, then pointed to the photograph again, her eyes full of quiet longing. I spoke softly. You loved him very much. Tears slipped down the edges of her eyes, silent, delicate like morning dew. She didn't wipe them away. She just let them fall. Her hands moved to the notebook once more. She wrote another line. He was all I had. The sentence was simple, but the truth behind it felt vast, like a room filled with memories, waiting for someone to open the door and step inside. She wrote again. And when he died, my voice died too. My chest tightened. I looked at her, at the pain she held so quietly, and wondered how she survived all these years with so little left. What happened to him? I asked quietly. Her hand hesitated on the page. She didn't write immediately. She closed her eyes for a moment, just long enough for me to see the ache rising in her. Then she wrote slowly, each word trembling. He saved someone. Not you. Froze. Saved someone. Not me. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or guilty. She continued writing. He saved a child. A stranger. Her breath shook. He ran into the road. My stomach dropped. She wrote the final word slowly. so slowly it felt like time stretched around it. Car. I inhaled sharply, quiet, pained. She didn't lift her eyes. Her fingers tightened around the notebook until her knuckles grew pale. I took a slow step closer, standing right beside her. But I didn't touch her. I let her grief breathe. After a long moment, she turned the page again. Her hand shook even more now, but she wrote anyway, refusing to hide from the truth she had lived with for years. He saved a life. Then she wrote. But I lost mine. My eyes grew warm. I wanted to say something, anything that might ease the weight she carried. But there are moments in life when words feel too small. Moments when silence holds more compassion than language. So I stayed silent with her. Present. Steady. Warm. We stood beside her son's gate, listening to the wind move gently through the trees, the quiet street holding us like a soft embrace. After a long while, she turned to me again and handed me the notebook. There was another sentence waiting for me. You walk with me now. But one day you will know why. A soft, uneasy shiver moved through me, not frightening, just mysterious, like a curtain lifting slightly to reveal the shape of something behind it. What do you mean? I whispered. She didn't write an answer. She simply pressed the notebook gently against her heart and began to walk back toward the street. I followed, feeling a mix of confusion and wonder turning slowly inside me. She stopped halfway down the block, turned to face me, and looked into my eyes with a softness that felt strangely familiar, like someone who knew me more deeply than I realized. Her hand lifted just slightly, not pointing, not gesturing, almost as though she wanted to touch my face, but stopped herself, as if unsure she was allowed. Instead, she lowered her hand and reached for her notebook again. She wrote one line before passing it to me. You remind me of him. My breath trembled. Her son. Daniel. I looked again at the photograph and back at her. I'm not him, I whispered. She shook her head gently, not disagreeing, but explaining in the quietest way possible. She took the notebook from my hands, turned to a blank page, and wrote slowly. Not his face. I paused. His kindness. My throat tightened. Kindness. It felt like such a small word, and yet she wrote it as if it carried everything she had left. She placed her hand over her heart again. Then she pointed at me. Her meaning was clear, even without words. Her son had shown kindness. Now, in helping her, I was offering the same. A bond forming across years, across loss, across silence. We walked home slowly that morning. She held the notebook close, as if afraid the memories inside might slip away. When we reached the corner where she usually turned toward her house, she paused. She looked at me again, holding my eyes for longer than usual. Then, to my surprise, she reached up with her fragile hand and touched my cheek, light as a whisper. Her fingers trembled against my skin. Her eyes softened. And without any words, she let me feel something deep and quiet. Affection, recognition, gratitude, and something else I didn't fully understand yet. She lowered her hand slowly. Then she walked away. Her steps were tiny, her silhouette small against the early sunlight. I watched her until she disappeared into the distance. As I turned to leave, I carried something with me, something I couldn't name yet, but which sat gently in my chest. Question. Connection. A thread leading somewhere I had not yet reached. But I would. Her truth had only begun to unfold. And mine was waiting quietly just behind it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the conversation with the old lady. Maybe it was the memory of her touch on my cheek. Or maybe it was the quiet pull in my chest, urging me to understand something I still could not name. The sky outside my window was pale blue, soft and early. The kind of morning that made everything feel slower, gentler. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, breathing in the quiet stillness of my room. Her words replayed in my head. He knew you. One day you will know why. I didn't know what she meant, but her certainty unsettled me. Not in a frightening way, but in a way that made me feel like a forgotten part of my past had begun to stir. When I stepped outside, the air was crisp. The neighborhood was still waking up. Few birds hopped along the sidewalk. A neighbor swept leaves from his porch. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell quiet again. I walked to the corner, expecting to wait for her the way I always did. But she was already there, standing quietly, notebook held close to her chest, eyes lifted toward the sky. She looked peaceful in the morning light, almost softened around the edges. When she saw me approaching, a small smile formed in her eyes, just the eyes, not the lips, but enough for me to feel it. I walked up to her slowly. "Good morning," I whispered, even though I knew she couldn't reply out loud. She nodded gently. But something was different today. There was a subtle heaviness in her posture, a slight tremble in her hands. Not from the cold or her age. Something deeper. Her breath came unevenly, as if she had been standing there longer than she should have, waiting for me with more urgency than usual. "Are you all right?" I asked softly. She pressed her lips together, not to hide anything but to steady herself. Then she raised her notebook and wrote. "I had a dream." I looked at her, waiting. She hesitated, then wrote another line. "About him, her son." She turned to the next page and wrote. "He told me I should tell you the truth." The truth. The way she wrote the word made something inside me shift. Gently but unmistakably. "What truth?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. Her fingers tightened around the pen as she wrote slowly, carefully, as though she feared the words themselves might break her if she rushed. "Not today." I frowned softly. "Whenever you're ready," I whispered. She nodded, grateful for the space. We began walking slowly toward her crossing. But today, she didn't move with the same small determination. Her steps were uneven, her breathing more labored than before. I held her arm carefully, letting her lean into me. When we reached the other side, she paused, then pointed down the street toward her son's house. "Do you want to go there today?" I asked. She hesitated. For the first time since she had shown me the photograph, she looked unsure. Her eyes drifted to the house for only a moment before she quickly looked away. Then she shook her head. I nodded gently. "We don't have to," I said. She touched her chest with her trembling hand, then pointed instead toward the small park 2 blocks down. A quiet place with old benches and tall trees that offered shade in the summer mornings. "All right," I murmured. "Let's go there today." We walked slowly, each step gentle, careful. She kept her notebook close, her fingers wrapped around it as though she needed its weight to steady herself. When we reached the park, she sat on her usual bench, the one facing the pond where ducks sometimes gathered. The water was still that morning, reflecting the soft light of the sky. She took a long, quiet breath. I sat beside her. We didn't speak for a moment. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt thoughtful, like something inside her was organizing itself, finding a way toward expression. Then, without warning, she opened her notebook. Her hands trembled noticeably now, but she wrote anyway. "I knew who you were the first day." I felt a soft chill slide down my back. First day. When I had offered to help her cross the road. "You recognized me?" I asked quietly. She nodded slowly. Her eyes softened with a sadness that felt older than her silence, older than her grief. She wrote another line. "You were not a stranger to me." My breath stilled. "But how?" I asked. Her hand paused over the page. She stared at the words she had just written, as if weighing whether she had the strength to continue. After a long moment, she turned the page. She wrote slowly, carefully. "You met him twice." I swallowed, my throat tight. "I remember one time, the night he helped me. But the second time." She nodded. Her pen moved again, forming uneven letters. "You were a child." Child. My heart thudded softly. She wrote again. "You were lost." The memory hit me faintly like a whisper from far away. A vague image of standing in a crowd, crying quietly, afraid to call out for help. A warm hand holding mine. A gentle voice saying, "It's all right. I'll help you find your family." I blinked slowly. That was him, I whispered. She nodded again, her eyes glistening. I stared at the pond, letting the memory settle into place. I hadn't thought about that day in years, maybe decades. It had faded the way childhood moments often do, leaving only the faintest echo behind. But now that echo returned, soft, familiar. "He found my parents," I murmured, remembering the warmth I had felt. "He stayed with me until they arrived." Her eyes filled with quiet tears, but her expression held something deeper than sadness. Something like gratitude, maybe even peace. She wrote, "He cared for everyone." Then she wrote, "He cared for you." I exhaled slowly. But why didn't he ever tell me his name? Asked. Why didn't he say anything more? She hesitated before writing. "He didn't want recognition." I nodded slowly. Made sense. The man I remembered didn't feel like someone who needed attention. He felt like someone who gave kindness because it was simply who he was. We sat quietly for a moment, both of us lost in the past. Then she wrote, "You walked with me because of him." I looked at her gently. "No," I said softly. "I walked with you because you needed help." She held my eyes for a long moment, then shook her head. Not disagreeing, just adding something deeper. She wrote, "I see him in you. That is why I trusted you." I felt my chest tighten. Not painfully, just deeply. She turned another page and wrote, "You were the last person he helped before he died." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I felt the truth settle inside me like a soft ache. Her son had helped me on one of the darkest nights of my early adulthood. Simple act. A moment of kindness. Something he probably forgot the next day. But she remembered. She held on to it the way some people hold on to light, especially when the rest of their world has grown dim. She wrote again, "You were his last kindness." I inhaled softly. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or guilty or overwhelmed. So instead I asked the only question that felt right. "Why didn't you tell me before?" She lowered her eyes, as if considering her answer. Then she wrote, "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" I whispered. Her pen moved slowly. "That you would walk away." My heart ached. "I wouldn't," I said gently. She looked at me for a long moment, searching perhaps for any sign of doubt. When she found none, her shoulders softened. Then she wrote one more line. "You stayed. Because you are kind." I looked at her, feeling something warm fill the space between us, a quiet bond shaped by her son's memory and our shared mornings. A bond formed through kindness, loss, and silence. We sat on the bench for a long time after that. Neither of us felt the need to speak or write. The world around us moved slowly. The trees rustled softly overhead. The water in the pond shimmered with gentle ripples. After a while, she closed her notebook and placed it gently on her lap. Then she reached for my hand. Her fingers were thin and fragile, but her grip was warm and steady. She held my hand with a certainty that felt almost like trust blooming in slow motion. I didn't let go. We stayed like that for several minutes, holding hands quietly, an old woman and a stranger who was not really a stranger at all. Finally, she let out a soft breath and stood carefully. "Do you want me to walk you home?" "Yes." She nodded. We walked slowly through the park, her hand still lightly holding mine, as though letting go might cause something important to slip away. When we reached her street, she stopped again. Not to rest. Not because she was tired. She turned to me with a soft, fragile expression and touched her chest, then pointed to me. As if to say, "I'm not alone anymore." I felt something deep inside me shift, something warm, something steady, something true. I placed my hand over hers gently. "I'm here," I whispered. Her fingers trembled under mine, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she nodded, and for a single moment, she looked lighter, like a long-carried burden had finally begun to loosen. She walked the rest of the way to her door alone, slowly, but with a calm I had not seen in her before. And as I watched her disappear inside her small house, I knew this was not the end of the truth she had promised me. It was only the beginning. That evening, long after I returned home, I found myself sitting by my window, watching the quiet street below. The world outside felt still, almost thoughtful, the way it sometimes does when a truth has just revealed itself. I kept thinking about her words, about her son, about the small moments that connected our lives without either of us knowing. Childhood memory, a night of fear, a gentle stranger who helped me twice, and left the world too early, and the mother who carried all of it in silence. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly, letting everything settle. Her grief, her trust, her quiet hope. The next morning when I reached the corner, she was already there again, standing with her notebook held close, her eyes softer than I had ever seen them. When I stepped beside her, she reached out and touched my arm lightly, not asking for help, not asking for answers, just letting me know she was no longer walking alone. We crossed the street together, our steps slow but steady. The sunlight touched the houses gently. The morning air felt calmer than usual. And even though neither of us spoke a word, something between us had changed. Something had opened. Something had healed. Something had begun. As we reached the other side of the road, she looked at me with a quiet, grateful expression, an expression that told me the truth she carried was now shared, even if only in fragments. I nodded softly. A small, fragile peace passed between us. And with that, the turning point of our story settled quietly into place. In the days that followed, something gentle settled into my routine. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just a quiet shift, the kind you only notice when you pause and look closely. The old lady whose name I finally learned was Mrs. Hanley began waiting for me every morning. Not in an obvious way. She still stood with her notebook held close, still looked down at the ground as the cars passed, still kept her shoulders small and careful. But when she saw me walking toward her, her posture changed a little. She lifted her head. She breathed easier. She gave me a small, soft smile. It was the first time I ever saw her smile. I remember thinking that small smiles can carry whole stories inside them, and hers was one of those. As we crossed the street, she stayed close to me. Not pressing, not clinging, just close enough that I knew she welcomed the company. I spoke less during those days, and she spoke more. Not in long sentences. Not in full stories. But in fragments. Memories. Loose threads of a life held quietly for too long. Sometimes she told me about her garden. How her roses always bloomed early, even when the weather was wrong for them. How she used to sit outside at dawn just to hear the birds wake up. Sometimes she told me about her son, but only the gentle parts, the ones she could hold without trembling. How he used to help her carry heavy groceries. How he hummed when he walked around the house. How he never liked to see her eat alone. He did not like silence, she said one morning, her voice steady but fragile. He said it made him feel lost. I nodded, letting her words settle in the air between us. She looked at me with quiet eyes. I am learning not to be afraid of silence, she said. But it helps, when someone stands in it with you. I felt something in my chest soften like a knot untying. Maybe it was the way she said it. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, not with sorrow, but with trust. Or maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to carry silence alone. I did not tell her that. Not yet. But I think she sensed it. One afternoon I walked her home. She hesitated for a moment, almost shy, but then she nodded and let me accompany her. Her house sat near the end of a quiet street, shaded by a large tree that leaned slightly toward the road. The branches hung low, as if guarding the memories inside. When we reached her porch, she stopped and looked up at me. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them by her sides. "Would you?" she began, then paused. Her voice was soft, like she wasn't sure she should ask. "Would you like to come in for tea?" It was the first time she ever invited me into her home. I nodded gently. Yes, I'd like that. Inside, her house smelled like lavender and something faintly sweet, maybe old books, maybe time itself. Everything was tidy, placed with care, as if she had once arranged her life around someone she loved and never changed the layout since. Framed photographs lined the walls. Some showed a younger woman standing in gardens. Others showed a young man, her son, with a shy smile, the kind that made you want to smile back. She noticed where I was looking and stepped beside me. "He never liked taking pictures," she said, brushing the edge of one frame with her fingers. "But he let me take these." I studied one photograph more closely. Her son stood beside a bicycle, sunlight falling across his face. He looked gentle. He looked kind. And suddenly, for a moment, I could picture the night he helped me when I was a terrified, lost child. The same warmth. The same gentle presence. I swallowed softly. "I don't know if anyone ever told him," I said quietly. "But he was a good person." She nodded. Slowly. Thoughtfully. "I knew," she whispered. "I always knew." She made tea in small porcelain cups that had tiny flowers painted on them. She placed one in front of me and held hers carefully between her palms. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence was different from before. It was calmer, softer, like two people sitting in the same gentle moment, letting the world breathe around them. Then she looked up at me and asked something unexpected. "May I ask why you always helped me, before you knew any of this?" I took a slow breath. I hadn't prepared an answer. I hadn't even asked myself that question fully. But the truth came out in the simplest words. "Because you looked alone," I said. "And I know what that feels like." Her eyes softened with understanding, and she reached across the table, her fingertips brushing the back of my hand. It was a small touch, but it carried something tender, something both of us understood. "You helped me more than you know," she whispered. "Before I met you, I had stopped believing anyone noticed me at all. I felt a quiet ache in my chest. Not sad. Not heavy. Just a human." She lifted her notebook from the table and opened it with slow, careful hands. Inside were pages and pages filled with her handwriting. Small, neat lines of thoughts, memories, and quiet feelings. On one page, she had drawn a little sketch, two figures standing on opposite sides of a street. She turned the notebook toward me. "This is us," she said softly. "The day you first helped me. I drew it so I would not forget." I looked at the drawing, simple and delicate, and felt something warm rise inside me. "I didn't know I mattered that much," I whispered. She smiled a little. "You mattered long before you knew it." After that afternoon, our connection settled into something steady and familiar. Not rushed, not intense, just quiet and real. I would meet her at the corner every morning, and we crossed the street together, like two people who had finally learned to walk at the same pace. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she listened. Sometimes we simply shared the silence like it was a gentle blanket pulled between us. She began telling me small things about her days, what she cooked for lunch, the book she was trying to finish, the neighbor who always forgot to bring in his trash bins. And I told her small things too, how work was going, how my sleep had been, whether the weather felt comforting or heavy. It was an exchange without pressure. No one demanded anything. No one pushed too far. It felt like healing without calling itself healing. One morning, while we waited for the light to change, she leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "I slept well last night." I smiled at her. "That's good. I'm glad." She nodded, her eyes warm and steady. "It has been a long time." We walked across slowly, and I noticed her steps were a little more confident, a little less hesitant. When we reached the other side, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said softly, "there was a time when crossing this street felt impossible. Not because of the cars, but because every time I reached the corner, I remembered standing there with him." I listened quietly, allowing her words to come at their own pace. "He used to meet me here," she continued. "He always held my arm. He always checked both ways twice. He said I didn't look where I walked." She paused, breathing carefully, as if sorting through the memory. "When I lost him, kept coming back to this spot. But without him the road felt too wide, too loud, too empty." I felt the weight of what she was saying, but it didn't fall heavy between us. It settled gently, like a soft truth crossing a quiet room. And then one day, she said, giving me a small smile, someone stepped beside me. Someone kind. Her eyes glistened slightly, not from pain, but from something quieter, something almost peaceful. You made the road feel smaller again, she whispered. I swallowed, touched in a way I couldn't quite put into words. I'm glad, I said softly. I'm glad I could help. She squeezed my hand lightly, just once, then let go. As the days went on, she spoke more freely about her son. Not the tragedy of losing him, but the life she shared with him. She told me how he liked to fix broken things, chairs, radios, even small toys left on the sidewalk. She told me how he learned to cook because he thought every person should know how to feed themselves with care. She told me how he used to whistle songs he didn't know the names of, making up the melodies as he walked through the house. The house feels too quiet without that sound, she said one morning. But sometimes, I think I still hear it. Just faintly. In the mornings. I didn't tell her that grief sometimes gives echoes like that. Maybe she didn't need the explanation. Maybe the memory itself was enough. One afternoon, she surprised me again by asking if I wanted to see her garden. We walked around the side of her house to a small patch of earth filled with roses, lavender, and tiny white flowers I didn't know the name of. My husband planted these, she said, touching the petals of a red rose. And after he passed, my son took care of them. He said they reminded him of summer mornings. The garden felt peaceful, like a place where time slowed down just enough to let a person breathe. She knelt beside a small plant with delicate purple blooms and brushed the soil softly. This one is new, she whispered. I planted it after you came into my life. I looked at the little flower, surprised. After me? She nodded, not looking up. It is called a friendship plant. It grows slowly, but it lasts a long time. The simplicity of her gesture warmed something inside me, something I had forgotten how to feel. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was the quiet comfort of being trusted. Or maybe it was the recognition that kindness often creates roots in places we don't expect. When she stood again, she wiped her hands gently on her skirt and looked at me with a soft, almost proud smile. It is good to plant something new, she said. It helps the heart remember that life still grows. I nodded, letting her words settle inside me. Thank you for showing me, I said. It's beautiful. She took a slow breath, looking around the garden with thoughtful eyes. I have lived many years, she said quietly. And grief has taken much from me. But it has also shown me something. Something I did not expect. What's that? I asked. She turned toward me, her expression calm and sure. That even after loss, she whispered, the heart can still open. Maybe not the same way. Maybe not as quickly. But it can open. I felt her words more than I heard them. Not because they were profound, but because they were true in the simplest, clearest way. She reached for my hand again, just briefly. You helped me open mine, she said. And I hope I have helped you open yours too. I didn't know how to respond at first. The words felt too large to hold. But she waited patiently, as she always did. Finally I said, yes, you have. Her eyes softened, and she nodded, as if she had known the answer long before I spoke it. We stood in the garden for a while longer, letting the soft wind move through the leaves around us. Birds sang somewhere in the distance. The afternoon light warmed the tops of the flowers. And in that quiet moment, I realized something simple and steady. We were two people who had helped each other without meaning to. Without planning. Without expecting anything in return. Just two lives crossing paths at the right moment. Just two hearts learning to breathe again. As the days passed, our small routine began to feel like a part of the neighborhood itself. People noticed us, though not in a loud or intrusive way. They would smile as they walked by, nod gently, or offer a soft greeting. One neighbor, a woman who often watered her plants in the morning, said with a warm smile, "It's nice seeing you walk together." Mrs. Hanley simply nodded, her cheeks lifting in a quiet blush. After we turned the corner, she whispered to me. People never spoke to me before. Not like that. I looked at her surprised. Really? You've lived here so long. She gave a small, shy shrug. Grief makes people uncomfortable. They do not mean to avoid you. They just do. I understood more than she knew. Silence can make someone invisible. Sadness can make people turn away without realizing it. But now, walking beside her, I noticed something else. People didn't see her sadness anymore. They saw someone accompanied. Someone less alone. She noticed the change too. And it softened her in ways I hadn't expected. One afternoon, as we sat on her porch drinking warm tea, she closed her eyes and tilted her head toward the light breeze. "It feels good to be part of the world again," she said. I watched her quietly. "You were always part of it." She opened her eyes and smiled. "Yes, maybe. But I did not feel it." A pause. "Now I do." A gentle silence followed, the kind that didn't feel heavy or uncertain. It felt like a pause shared between two people who understood each other's quiet places. That day she surprised me with something else. She reached under a small wooden box on the table and pulled out a folded letter, worn at the edges. "This is the last letter my son wrote to me," she said softly. "I never showed it to anyone. But I want you to see it." For a moment I wasn't sure I should take it. Felt like something precious, something deeply personal. But she held it out with steady hands, so I accepted it with care. I opened the letter slowly. The handwriting was gentle, careful, as if each word had been placed with love. It wasn't long. Just a simple message. In it he told her he loved her. He told her she had always been his safe place. He told her he was proud of her strength. And near the end, he wrote something that made my hands tighten slightly. He wrote, "If one day I cannot be there for you, I hope someone kind will stand beside you, just as you always stood beside me." I read the line twice, almost not believing it. It felt like a quiet bridge between his life and mine, like he had spoken to both of us without knowing it. When I handed the letter back, she looked at me with gentle eyes. "He hoped someone would help me," she said. "And you did." I swallowed softly. "I didn't know. I just saw you standing alone." She reached out and rested her hand briefly on my arm. That was enough. For the first time, something inside me loosened an old tightness I had carried since childhood. I had spent years trying not to need anyone. Years trying to stand strong even when I felt small. Years feeling like kindness was something offered to others, not something meant for me. But her presence changed that. Her trust changed that. Her quiet, steady gratitude changed that. In helping her, something in me was finding space to heal too. A week later, an unexpected rainstorm arrived. The sky darkened early, and heavy drops began to fall against the windows of my apartment. I thought of her immediately. She hated crossing the street when the ground was wet. Her fear of slipping had grown stronger with age, and she usually stayed inside during storms. Still, a part of me worried she might be standing at the corner, waiting. I grabbed my umbrella and hurried outside. The rain was cold, and the wind pushed against me. I walked faster, the streets blurred by rushing water and the glow of dim streetlights. When I reached the corner, I saw her standing under the small overhang of a closed shop, watching the rain with a conflicted expression. I hurried toward her. "You didn't have to come out," I said gently. She looked up, her hair slightly damp, her eyes soft with relief. "I wasn't going to," she said. "But then I thought, I didn't want to miss our morning." Her words warmed me more than the coat I wore. I opened the umbrella and held it over both of us. "Come on," I said. "Let's walk together." She nodded, stepping beside me. The rain hit the umbrella in soft, rhythmic taps. Our footsteps moved slowly, careful on the wet pavement. We crossed the street the way we always did, side by side, breathing at the same quiet pace. Halfway across, she slipped her hand into mine. Her grip wasn't tight. It was gentle, steady. "I feel safe," she whispered. "So do I," I said. The moment was simple, but it felt like something important had settled between us, something that wasn't rooted in the past, or in pain, or in the shadow of her grief. Felt like something growing, something new, something steady. When we reached her home, she turned to me with a soft smile. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to find me in the rain." I shook my head. "You don't have to thank me." She smiled a little wider. "I know. But I want to." I watched her walk up her steps and disappear into her warm, quiet house. For a moment, I stayed under the umbrella, listening to the rain settle over the street. Something inside me felt lighter than it had in years. Something inside me felt found. Over the next few weeks, our quiet companionship settled into something steady and familiar, like a path worn gently into the ground, not from force, but from repeated steps taken with care. Every morning I found her waiting for me at the same corner. Sometimes she arrived first. Sometimes I did. But neither of us ever waited long for the other. She no longer looked down at the road with fear. She looked forward. She walked with small, certain steps, trusting that she didn't have to cross alone anymore. And in a way I never expected, she began helping me too. One morning when I seemed unusually quiet, she touched my arm gently. "You are thinking too much," she said. I chuckled softly. "I guess I am." She nodded, as if she understood more than I had said. "You do not have to carry everything alone. Even strong people need someone to walk beside them." Her words settled inside me with a warmth I didn't know I needed. After we crossed, she held my hand for a moment, a brief, comforting squeeze, then let go. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was simple. It was human. It was enough. One day she invited me to stay for lunch. I sat at her small kitchen table while she moved slowly but confidently around the counter, preparing sandwiches and warm soup. "I used to cook for two every day," she said with a quiet smile. "I forgot how comforting it feels." I helped her carry the dishes. We ate together, the soft clink of spoons against bowls filling the room with a gentle rhythm. After we finished, she surprised me by taking out a small wooden box from a high shelf. "I want you to have this," she said. I shook my head. "Mrs. Hanley, you don't have to." She lifted her hand, stopping me with a quiet gesture. "I want to," she repeated. She opened the box. Inside was a simple silver key attached to a short blue ribbon. "This is a key to my house," she said softly. "In case I need help one day. Or if I fall. Or if I am too weak to answer the door." I stared at her, unsure what to say. Felt like something too important to accept. "I don't know if I should." She gently closed my fingers around the key. Her voice was steady. "You have already been there for me," she whispered. "I trust you. And that trust is something I want to give, not because I expect something in return, but because you have given me something too." I swallowed softly. "What's that?" She smiled. "Presents." The word was simple, but it carried more weight than any gift. I nodded slowly, accepting the key, feeling its meaning settle into my hand. "Thank you," I murmured. Her eyes softened. "You are welcome. Truly." As the days grew longer and the sun rose earlier, she seemed brighter too. Her shoulders sat a little straighter. Her steps grew steadier. Her voice carried more warmth. One morning while we crossed the street, she said something I had never heard from her before. "I am not afraid anymore." I turned to her, surprised. "Of crossing?" She shook her head. "No. Of living." Her words were gentle, but they reached deeply into me. "I thought my story had already ended," she said thoughtfully. "I thought my life would only be filled with memories. I thought I had nothing left to hope for." She paused as the morning air brushed softly past us. "But you showed me something. Something quiet but very real." "What's that?" I asked. "That it is still possible," she whispered. "To feel connected. To feel seen. To feel safe." Her voice trembled just a little, not from sadness, but from gratitude too deep for easy expression. "And you," she added softly, "you needed to feel those things too. I could see it, even when you could not." I looked at her, unable to speak for a moment. "So," she continued, "maybe we helped each other. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But enough." Those words stayed with me. They settled into my mind and heart like a gentle truth I had waited years to understand. We didn't fill each other's empty spaces. We didn't erase each other's pain. But we walked beside each other. And somehow that changed everything. One evening, near the end of spring, she asked me to sit with her on the porch. The sky was turning orange, and the birds were settling into the trees above us. We didn't talk much at first. We just sat there, listening to the soft sounds of the world closing down for the night. After a while, she turned her head slightly. "I want you to promise me something," she said. I looked at her gently. "What is it?" She folded her hands in her lap and breathed slowly. "When I am gone one day years from now, I hope please do not let loneliness be the thing you return to." I felt her words as if they were placed carefully in my hands. "You deserve connection," she continued. "You deserve warmth. You deserve people who care for you the same way you cared for me." Her voice grew softer. "You are not meant to walk alone. Even if you think you are." I nodded, my throat tight. "I promise," I whispered. She smiled, not sad, not heavy, just peaceful. "Good," she said. "Then I can rest easier." We sat there until the last light faded from the sky. And in that quiet, shared moment, something settled between us that didn't need words. A kind of understanding. A kind of bond. A kind of gentle closure, not ending anything, but giving shape to what we had built together. When I walked home that night, I felt a calmness I hadn't felt in years. Not because everything was perfect. Not because all wounds were healed. But because I realized I was no longer walking through life quietly wishing someone would notice me. Someone had. And in noticing her back, I had found a piece of myself too. The seasons began to change again. The mornings grew softer. The air carried the quiet promise of summer. And life settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and gentle. I still met Mrs. Hanley every morning at the corner. We still crossed the street together. We still shared small stories, small silences, small pieces of our days. But something inside both of us had shifted. We were no longer two strangers connected by coincidence. We were simply part of each other's lives. I didn't think much about how it happened. Sometimes the most important things grow quietly, beneath the surface, without asking for attention. Sometimes the heart learns to open without realizing it. One morning, as we reached the other side of the street, she stopped and looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think the world grew smaller when people left it. I thought every loss would shrink my life a little more." She paused, her eyes gentle, her voice steady. "But now I see it differently." I waited, letting her speak in her own time. "My world didn't shrink," she whispered. "It just waited. It waited for someone to walk back into it." Her words warmed something deep in me, something quiet, something that had been waiting too. "And I think," she said, taking a slow breath, "your world was waiting too." I nodded, unable to hide the small smile forming on my face. "Maybe it was," I said quietly. She reached out and held my hand for a moment, a gesture full of tenderness and simplicity. "It is strange," she said, "how two people can help each other without planning anything, without even knowing it is happening." "It is," I agreed. We stood there a little longer, letting the morning move gently around us. Then she released my hand and said, "Come, let's walk." And we continued on step by step the way we always did. The months passed peacefully. Her garden bloomed again. The little plant she called the friendship plant grew taller, its purple flowers opening like soft, steady breaths of color. Sometimes she would ask me to water it when she felt tired. Sometimes I would find her sitting beside it, humming quietly to herself. "It reminds me that life still grows," she said once, "and that there is always room for something new." I understood what she meant, because somewhere along the way, she had become a part of my life too, like a soft presence filling a quiet room. There were evenings when I stopped by just to check on her. There were mornings when I brought her fresh bread from the bakery. There were afternoons when we sat on her porch, talking about nothing and everything at once. We learned each other's rhythms. Her gentle pauses. My quiet thoughts. The way both our hearts carried things from the past, but still found space for each other in the present. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't extraordinary. It was simply human. And quietly beautiful. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the street with soft gold, she asked me something unexpected. "Will you read something for me?" she said. "Of course," I answered. She handed me her notebook, the same one she always carried at the corner, the one filled with memories and hopes written in her small, careful handwriting. "Read the last page," she said gently. I opened it with care. The page held a few simple lines. Some people arrive quietly. They step into your life without asking. And without knowing it, they become a light you didn't realize you needed. My throat tightened as I looked up. She smiled at me, soft, calm, full of a warmth I had come to cherish. "You were that light," she said. I didn't know what to say. I didn't think any words would be enough. So I just reached out and held her hand. "You were that light too," I whispered. We sat together for a long time after that, watching the light fade into evening. The world around us felt calm, almost tender, as if acknowledging the quiet journey we had shared. A journey that began with fear at a street corner. A journey held together by small moments, small kindnesses, small truths. A journey that healed parts of both of us we hadn't even known were still hurting. As the sky darkened, she looked at me with gentle eyes. "One day," she said softly, "you will help someone else. The way you helped me." I shook my head. "I don't know if I can." She smiled, her voice steady and sure. "You already have the kind of heart that sees people. That is rare. And it is needed." Her words settled deeply within me like a quiet promise, like a seed planted in a place I hadn't noticed before. I didn't argue with her. I didn't doubt her the way I once would have. I simply nodded. "Maybe," I whispered. "Yes," she said. "Maybe is enough." When it was finally time for me to leave, I stood from the porch and looked back at her. She sat there in the soft glow of her porch light, her small notebook resting on her lap, her face peaceful. "Good night," I said. She lifted her hand in a gentle wave. "Good night, dear." I walked down her steps slowly, feeling something warm settle inside me, a kind of quiet peace I hadn't felt in years. A peace born not from fixing the past, but from sharing the present. A peace born from simple kindness. A peace born from connection. As I reached the end of the path and stepped onto the street, I felt the truth of it settle even more clearly. Some people enter your life without noise or warning. They arrive gently, like soft light through a window. And somehow, without trying, they open your heart. Mrs. Hanley was one of those people. And maybe without knowing it, I was one for her too. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is a simple one. Kindness does not need to be loud. Healing does not need to be perfect. Connection does not need to be planned. Sometimes it only takes noticing someone, standing beside them, sharing a moment, crossing a street together. And in those quiet, ordinary moments, life can change in the smallest and most beautiful ways. That is what the old lady taught me. That is what I will remember always. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.